The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Well, good evening and welcome to my State of Mind. I am Dan Yorke, fresh off the completion of the Democratic National Convention and tonight, Monday evening, the start of the Republican National Convention. It's probably a good idea to check in with Rhode Islanders' top pollster, the guy who's got his finger on the pulse of the data, some of which in COVID season is probably self-explanatory, others of which are very nuanced because there's so many moving parts in those kinds of things that we want to poll, including, where we are on schools, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but mostly, the dynamics of the national election and how the virtuality of the coverage and the the lack of bipartisanship, the very partisan approach to all of this has a lot to do with, the pulse and where the voter behavior will be. So Joe Fleming of Fleming Associates coming up here in a moment. First, though, here's the network's take on the DNC last week.
The fireworks over the Wilmington skyline signaled the end of the Democratic convention. Democrats' 2020 candidate for president, Joe Biden, provided some fireworks of his own as he accepted the party's nomination.
Our current president has failed in his most basic duty to the nation. He's failed to protect us.
Biden spent a good portion of his 25-minute speech focused on the coronavirus pandemic.
The president still does not have a plan. Well, I do. If I'm your president, on day one, we'll implement the national strategy I've been laying out since March.
And he promised to be a president for the whole country, not just Democrats.
We can choose a different path and together take this chance to heal, to reform, to unite, a path of hope and light. This is a life-changing election.
Republicans agree this is a critical election. That's why the Trump administration says it's fighting to stop the expansion of mail-in voting.
Very little accountability. That's why we're in courts, houses across the country. We're going to defend the integrity of the ballot, and we're going to win a victory on November 3rd.
The theme of next week's Republican National Convention is honoring the great American story, with featured speakers each night. Republicans plan to highlight President Trump's accomplishments during his first 4 years in office.
The choice here is between a president who's rebuilt our military, revived our economy, stood by all our liberties, stood for law and order, and Joe Biden and the Democratic Party that have been overtaken by the radical left.
President Trump will deliver his speech on the White House's South Lawn Thursday night.
And so I've missed him. Joe Fleming, pollster, hasn't joined the program since we were last in studio, and we'll get right to this DNC and the notes for the RNC, the polling data that we see all over the place. But Joe, little personal reflection. How have you been doing during this COVID season?
Been doing fine. 3 or 4 months weren't able to see the grandkids, so that was a little tough, but now it's a little bit better.
Yeah, good. So you told me prior to the recording that you actually have been busy polling.
Yep.
Bits on what you're polling, and then we'll dig into some of the pertinent issues right now.
Well, the polling, we did a couple for the Hassenfeld Institute during the pandemic on issues in the pandemic. And we've just done a few polls for the teacher unions on returning to school with parents and with teachers.
All right, so why don't we get into that at our latter segment? Tell me what your reflection was on the DNC convention in general.
Well, I think overall, Joe Biden had a good convention due to the fact I think he had a good speech at the very end. I think the big problem with the convention is simply a CBS poll that showed that 71% of the people who were watching the convention were Democrats, and only 17% were independents, and another 11% were Republicans. So I don't know how many voters he's actually going to move as a result of the convention, but I think he probably solidified his base quite a bit more as a result of the convention.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Joe, because I talked to a couple of, I know, staunch Trump supporters who still remain staunch, right? And they literally laughed at me when I asked if they had seen any of the convention. I said, "Hey, did you see the speech last night?" And then there was as if it was ridiculous to suggest. I don't remember that in old times. I mean, you might get a response to say, it's not my party, or blah blah blah. I checked in, I saw or I wanted to see the opposite, but there's like a complete scoff at the idea.
Well, I think for the simple reason Donald Trump's base is solid. It's a very solid base, and there's no way they're going to move at all. So they have no interest at all listening to Joe Biden and the Democrats. They're just set on Donald Trump right now, and they're not going to move off that. The big question is that group of 8 or 10% in the middle, how are they going to move? Right now, they're moving towards Joe Biden, but we still have like 72 days to go before the election, so it can still change greatly.
Do you think this COVID season that we are dealing with has anything to, and the fact that this is a virtual convention and all of that, does that have much to do with this lack of interest from the other side?
Well, I think overall people are still focused on the COVID. People focus about the kids going back to school in some way in the next week or two, or already back at school. And so I think the interest in the conventions aren't as great as they were in the past years. Again, conventions are fading, I think, as time goes on. It's not like the old days where they were on the air 10 hours a day covering everything. Now you get an hour on the major networks. So people's interest is dwindling on the conventions, but I would expect them to still be tuning in like on Thursday night when Donald Trump gives his acceptance speech to see what he has to say.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump says he's going to speak in all 4 evenings, which is again, you know, the orthodoxy of party conventions has been affected obviously by the virus.
Right.
Certainly, at least the Democrats followed the format. It might have been virtual, but they followed the format. Whereas, you know, the former president will speak on Thursday along with the VP nominee, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden, you know, makes a couple of appearances and says hello, but makes his big speech on Thursday. Trump throws all of that out.
Right.
What does that say about what he's going to do?
Well, Donald Trump is totally different. You can't expect a traditional convention with Donald Trump running the whole show. He's going to be the main feature every single night. He's going to make sure he speaks. He's going to be the main focus. Now, whether it helps him or hurts him, we don't know. But again, I would expect in this convention, you're going to see a lot of Republicans, not many Democrats, and a few independents watching it. But I mean, Donald Trump's going to be the main focus. No question about that.
Well, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of former GOPers that are going to appear in this convention. So what does that tell everybody?
Well, first thing to keep in mind, Dan, is simply the Democrats had a lot more time to plan their convention than the Republicans. Because remember, the Republicans were still going to go and have their convention. They would have moved to Jacksonville. So it's just been in the last couple of months that it was changed. So they have to organize things better. But again, as I said, Donald Trump wants the focus to be on Donald Trump, not on other Republicans in the party. This is all about Donald Trump these next 4 days, I really believe. On his vision of America, the policies that he believes he's put through in the last 3.5 years, and what he wants to do for the next 4 years.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk about what really is at stake in terms of the arguments that are being made here for this November election. I do want to check in on some of the local political matters, and of course, I want to hear what people are thinking about the schools, because it really is the thing that everybody is talking about. Right back with Pollster Joe Fleming on My State of Mind. Please stay with us. Welcome back to My State of Mind. Joe Fleming, our pollster from Fleming Associates, has the, you know, he always has his thumb on the pulse of what people are thinking and how they're reacting. And Joe, you always remind everybody, every time we talk about polls, that it is about how people think right now.
That's correct. It's just a snapshot of the current time. I mean, right now we look at Joe Biden having about an 8-point lead nationally, but that's now like 72 days out. It could all change as we get closer. I'm going to start looking more closely at the polls after Labor Day, after the 2 conventions are done, and see how people are viewing it. And again, I'm more interested in the polls in the battleground states. That's where the election is going to be decided, not on the national polls, because the Electoral College is the key thing here. And right now in those key battleground states, Joe Biden has a lead. And the one thing that really surprises me, and I'm really watching closely, is Florida. He's been in the lead in Florida since March in all the polls. He's up by about 5 points. If he can continue to hold that, he's really going to force Donald Trump to spend a lot of money in Florida and give Joe Biden better opportunities in like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan.
Well, yeah. So earlier today, it seems like Pennsylvania is like 5 points. Florida's 8 points. Arizona's 9 points. Wisconsin and Michigan are in that 10 to 12 point range. North Carolina's at dead heat, which is just it's not surprising to me because I think Donald Trump has done everything he can to kick this thing away. Not in his mind, obviously, but anybody who's actually scoring this at home. But those states are really the whole thing. There's going to be 5 or 6 states, right?
You're correct. And what's happening, though, is some states that Donald Trump should be solid in. For example, Ohio, the average has Joe Biden up by 2 points, which means Donald Trump has to spend time and money in states that should be his solid already. So it's the field for Donald Trump is getting wider. He has more territory to defend, which is going to be more difficult.
And in that spending money thing, the content is going to be brutal, isn't it?
I think it's going to be very negative. I think you're going to see a lot of negative on Donald Trump. I mean, the sleepy Joe, the slow Joe. I think the speech that Joe Biden gave sort of dispels a lot of that. However, Donald Trump's going to keep going after him all the time. I think he's going to go after Joe Biden's son. It's going to be one thing after another. The question is, how do the voters respond to it?
Well, what's your crystal ball tell you? Because how long have we been talking about how distasteful the electorate thinks negative advertising is, but yet how it works?
It does. It does work. If it didn't work, they wouldn't be doing it. The question is, Donald Trump also has a lot of negatives. So when your negatives are stronger than your positives, what you want to do is bring your opponent down to your level. And that's what Donald Trump's going to try to do over the next 2.5 months, is try to bring Joe Biden down. Now, after the convention, Joe Biden's favorability has gone up. He has a better favorability rating at this point than he had before the convention. So we're going to see what happens with Donald Trump's favorability after this convention also. I'm not sure if that's going to move too much because people seem to be pretty set on Donald Trump at this point.
Well, traditionally, Joe, we see the 2 or 3 or 4 point bumps that come from the conventions, right, and then they recede. Is the virtual convention, I guess this week the RNC is going to try to make it more live than pre-recorded, but it's still virtual. Does the virtual aspect of this change the equation at all?
I'm really not sure. Well, as I said, after Labor Day, we'll know. We'll see after they have the 2 conventions if there's any change. Donald Trump right now is trailing nationally by about 8 points. Yesterday, there was a CBS poll that came out that has him down by 10. If the numbers stay like that after Labor Day, obviously, there really hasn't been much change from before the conventions to after the conventions. I just think a lot of people are set in their ways. There's only a small number of people that are going to move either way at this point, it looks like.
All right. So, I don't know. We'll be talking a lot during the election season, but the pollsters didn't get it right at the end, and I think there's that lingering thing. Although they got it right for the popular votes.
Right. That's correct.
What is your? I mean, I'm right in your wheelhouse now, so I know you're never offended by this. But what is the credibility of polls and polling and pollsters this season?
I think overall, the polls have been, as I said, they had it right nationally. The problem was in the states, in those key swing states. Obviously, the models they were using to sample weren't quite correct. They may have been oversampling people that were Democrats, maybe oversampling minorities, and if they didn't come out to vote, that changes the whole scenario. When you do these samples, you're trying to figure out what percent's going to come out of each group, and that's key. If you oversample one group, you're going to have a problem. I mean, if I'm doing a survey in the state of Rhode Island, 400 registered voters, and I do 200 of them for the city of Providence, the results are going to be skewed very strongly towards the Democrats. So sometimes just 1 or 2%, maybe too many females, too many males, too many young people, too many older people, that changes the whole results. And if you're only talking races that are close, that could skew it.
All right. What are we talking about in terms of minority turnout, and what are we talking about in terms of energy for each of these campaigns?
Well, I think Joe Biden's campaign has picked up some energy from the convention and also from his vice presidential pick. I think he's really aiming at increasing the turnout. If you notice during the convention, they talked about turnout all the time, motivating voters. I think you're going to see a big push, and especially in the swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, to really try to push the minority vote out. And I think that's going to be one of the keys for them to win the election because it was so close last time and they stayed home.
but it's going to be mail, right? I mean, with the mail, how can we translate the traditional polling to turnout, metric with what is going to be a very dominant male participation and all the controversy that goes along with that?
Well, I think a lot of it is just, with the polling, getting the models right. What percent of each group you're going to come out to vote with. I mean, the males, again, minority males are probably going very strongly towards Joe Biden. So if you can increase the turnout among minority males, you're helping yourself.
No,
I'm sorry.
The mail-in ballots.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. Yes, I think the mail. Okay. I think the mail-in ballots could have a huge effect on this election. First off, we're probably not going to know November 3rd unless it's a clear victory for somebody early on in the evening. Again, Donald Trump's trying to demonize the mail ballots right now to make people be concerned about it. Republicans say they want to vote in person. Democrats say they want to vote on mail ballots. So you may see on election night, Donald Trump doing very well in some of these key states. But when the mail ballots come in, it may be just the opposite is going to happen. I saw this in Rhode Island with the mail ballots in the presidential primary. On primary night, I think, if I remember correctly, Bernie Sanders had about 30% of the vote. When they counted all the mail ballots, his vote went down to about 15%. So the mail ballots changed it greatly. And I think we're going to see that in the presidential election, where Republicans are going to come out to the polls, Democrats want to mail the ballots in.
All right. Well, we'll see. All right. We'll check in with Joe on the politics again soon. When we come back, though, I want to ask him about some of the school polling data here in Rhode Island. Joe Fleming, Fleming Associates, right back on Dan Yorke Studio. Back with Joe Fleming, Fleming Associates, Rhode Island's lead pollster. So, Joe, you've been doing some work on school mindset and where parents are. I'll tell you, every day on the radio, we're live with phones, and it is a mixed bag, man. What does the polling data say?
Well, we did 2 polls for the teacher unions in the state of Rhode Island, and we found out, we talked to parents, and parents are concerned about the kids going back to school. They're concerned with their protection, with their health. Teachers are gravely concerned. They're concerned, students need to wear masks. They're concerned with the protections. But one thing that really stood out with the teachers is they're concerned about the air quality in the buildings, because a number of these teachers work in buildings that are very old, and they're concerned about the air quality that's going on in the building. But both teachers and parents have very grave concerns about going back to school in the fall full time.
Yeah. So where does that leave? I wonder if your services were even necessary. In other words, I know that people are split. I know that there's a lot of conflict. I know that what is it about the polling that the teacher unions think they needed to just kind of prove what it is that they think was out there?
Well, I think they wanted to find out exactly what was out there, how teachers really felt about going back to school, and they got a sense from that, and how parents felt. We interviewed 400 parents statewide, and they have a great concerns also about the kids going back to school. Some of them don't want to send them back to school. They want just virtual learning, and we're seeing that in some of the communities right now. But this just solidifies maybe what the teachers unions felt, but now they have data to prove it.
Yeah, I don't see that. I don't see more than a hybrid model at best being implemented here. The distance learning thing, in fact, as we tape the show at noonish on Monday afternoon, you're watching on Monday night, the governor had an early week press conference, and I'm sure talked about it. She's got a August 31 date to discuss who's open, who's closed. I think these are all phantom attempts. I mean, maybe legitimate in her mind, but phantom attempts to actually provide some rigidity of schedule, because this thing is too fluid, right? It's just too fluid. I'm sure the polling data is as solid as today, and it's news on the virus, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's good for that time. I mean, if the data changes, like if all once it skyrockets, it's going to change the polling data. If the virus moves up, if the virus moves down, it would change the polling data also. But right now, the infection rate seems to be pretty steady in Rhode Island. And I think it's up to the governor to make a decision what she wants to do. And again, August 31st is the key date.
So, in summary, tell me what the top pollster in the state thinks about the mindset of Rhode Islanders and our neighbors, maybe in Mass even. What is the overall psychological condition of the community?
Overall, I think people are still very concerned. I think we're seeing that in restaurants where people are willing to eat outside restaurants, not go inside restaurants a lot of time. There's still many people who basically are still staying home and only going out when they have to go out. They're just very concerned about the virus and catching it.
Yeah, and you know what? Again, you don't need a lot of statistical deviation to figure that out, do you?
No, not at all.
Some of this,
You just see it.
some of this stuff is self-explanatory. All right, very interesting stuff on the RNC DNC dynamic, Joe. We'll step up the pace with you over the course
Sure.
of the summer and the fall. Thank you so much for your
My pleasure.
Joe Fleming, folks. Final word. We'll come back. Stay with us. So it is always interesting when you talk to Joe Fleming, our lead pollster here in the state. Some things are like self-explanatory, but the data backs it up. Some things are not so self-explanatory, and the data teaches you. Again, another one of those exercises. We'll keep in touch with Joe all through this election season because it's going to be a doozy, no doubt. Talk to you on the radio tomorrow at 3 on WPRO and back here tomorrow night with Congressman Jim Langevin. Good night.